Kia ora koutou, everybody. So my name's Monique Kelly. I grew up in Southland, went to Otago University, and found my way over to Geneva, where I worked for about 14 years with the International Labour Organization, so one of the UN agencies over there. And I was in their policy department looking from a standard setting point of view around decent work. So very much in that human rights space, and came back to Otago about 8 years ago with my family and brought them back. And we live in Wanaka because my parents live here, so we wanted to be closer to them. So really happy to be back here. And when I came back, I have multiple hats now, but when I came back, could see a wave of change coming and going to be affecting our community very quickly. And with the Paris Agreement 2015 and seeing what was happening on a global level, and then not seeing the same reaction at the grassroots or even at the national level, it was quite concerning to look and see how do we translate the action that is needed into real action on the ground. So we set up a trust along with a business that we were running called WOW, and WOW stands for Forest, which is about that systems thinking and working as one. And it's all about helping communities to transition through this period so we can get to that point where we're really starting to thrive. So I think what the Paris Agreement has highlighted, and it's actually just, climate change is just one of the pressures that are actually on us at the moment. But what it's really pointed out is that we need to re-examine the way or our role in the creation and on this planet. And we have sort of had this hundreds of years where we've been going through this very extractive, we extract, we take, make, waste. And we've been doing it for a long time. And I think that humans in general, we come into a place and we take, we think that these resources are abundant everywhere and they're all there for us. And we just use them without any sort of long-term thinking. And we also have combined with that, it's been more of an individualistic perspective is that, we want more and more and more. Whereas we should really be asking ourselves, is that growth mentality what we want when we have these limited resources? We should actually be, the really key word is what is enough? And for me, it comes down to equity. We've got to the point where on April 27th this year, I think it was, if the date is right, we burned through one planet's worth of resources as a country. So if we were to live as we do, we would need, about 3 and a bit planets to actually sustain ourselves long term. So when we've got that, we're using up all of these materials, which is increasing our emissions, which is leading to biodiversity loss. It's leading to inequalities because of that growth mentality. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. We're getting a greater gap within that. And that's where the social justice of this comes into perspective. So for me, I think it really boils down from my motivation to act. It comes down to equity. And that's why I got into law in the first place, was around fairness. And I have a strong sense of social justice, which is, I think, something that, a lot of people do have. And in particular, like it's one of the Christian ideals is, we need to be just. What does that justice look like? For me, it's around 3 key things. We share this planet, like we are part of this system. So that's another thing to grapple with, is we're going from the thought that everything was here for us, and in fact, that even the sense of being guardians of this planet, are we really? Or are we just part of this system? We have to re-examine our role within the system and how do we give back to it, and how do we then step back and let it take over, so give it space to grow and take control. So there's that equity with those species that share this planet with us and those other beings. Then we have the equity when it comes down to community. We see this extractive sort of behavior that we have had as being really destructive when it comes to inequalities. And we can talk about inequalities within a country, that growing gap of between the rich and poor. In New Zealand, we, as a social democracy, we don't see it as extreme as we may see it in the US, for example. But we do see it with respect to, inequalities between, we are one of the major emissions emitters in the world globally as Kiwis. And our emissions are not impacting us as much as our neighbours in the Pacific, and they won't be. So where is the fairness in that? And do we have the right to continue in a lifestyle that we know is affecting others more than it will us? And it will be affecting those who are more vulnerable and do not have the money to move out of flood-prone places. So we need to think about that equity within communities. And the last one is the intergenerational equity. How are we actually providing and thinking, not just we're very intelligent beings. We have this incredible ability to come up with strategies and think, but we don't think long term, like we are, or in general. And I think that the Māori ethos around thinking within generations is one that, and this is relevant to many of the Indigenous cultures, is you're thinking generations ahead. How do we get to that point where we're not thinking in terms of a 3-year or a 5-year or even a 10-year strategy, but how are we thinking of a 100-year strategy? How are we thinking of a 200-year strategy? And our behavior then shifts when we do think of that. I think it's really one of the key things that we need to actually achieve and to get to that next place of where we can really thrive as a society and within a thriving environment is we need to think in sense of community and collective action, and really how do we as a community go forward with this. So I think the linchpin for everything with respect to sustainability is around that partnership model as well. So it's about how do we build our community up and help them transition through, and how do we actually partner with other organizations doing similar things, because there is a lot of change coming. We have to do it in a very short time frame relative to other changes that have come around. And we do need to be really conscious. We need to do this. If we can do this without getting to crisis point, we can strategically think about how to do it in the best manner, rather than how to do it in a reactive manner. So if the more of us that are on board and the more of us that are working together, the faster we go, the more learnings we'll have, that whole sense of collective intelligence and diversity of views really comes to the fore in times like this. And I think that that's where, if we have churches being able to partner up with community groups doing similar things, just allows for that wider audience also to come on board. And we do need to be conscious that the audience that this needs to apply to is from 0 to 99 and beyond. So, and it is really going back into the negative. It applies to those who are not yet born as well. And we need all of these groups with different networks and their colours and their ideas and their thoughts to actually be able to shape what that looks like going forward. From a church's perspective, I think if I go back and maybe look at it from our perspective and looking at the strategy that we use to help communities, we're using a very tried and true sort of behaviour change formula. And it's a really simple one. And there's some great ones out there. The ones that we use is, how do we inspire people to see and paint that picture of what it could look like down the track? And then how do we educate people? And that when you inspire people, that dispels any fear that they've got about change. And then when you educate them, so providing them with really good education, and one of the things I think is super important is to sort of dispel that misinformation. We need that, the education to be really good quality education. I'm looking at Dunedin. It's one of our centres of amazing education for over 150 years. We have the tools that we've got and the people we've got and the capacity and experience to do that really well. And I think the church is able to do that really well as well. So I think that's another thing, we educate, and that dispels the doubt. So then people who are really in that, oh, I don't know, this is not, you need that education to balance it. And then the third thing that we do is we enable. So what are the tools that we're actually giving? What are the resources? Because if you come out of a really amazing talk or a lecture and you're going, oh, wow, that was incredible, but you're coming away going, well, what next? How do I do this? We actually need to provide the how. And the best way to do that is small steps, because those little small steps in the beginning actually lead to greater steps afterwards. So if I took, for an example, one of the programs that we have been running for a while, we had set up, about 5 years ago, we started just doing talks and workshops, very light, around climate action and what that looked like, and really looking at what the problem is and small steps that we can take to understand the concept first, because for many of us, climate action only came into our lexicon in about 2018. When all of this sort of came up, that was, I think, a pivotal year. So we needed to feel those words and get them familiar in our mouth, I think, first. And then the work, and I sort of, it's almost like a farming analogy, and this is where that regenerative I think analogy can come in. You need to actually build that soil up. You need to prepare the soil before you can actually grow anything and make change. And the more work you put into preparing the soil, the healthier that plant and the more resilient and stronger it will be going forward. So it may seem like tiny little steps to prepare the soil and to get everybody sort of on board, make sure the consultations are all done, make sure that everyone is familiar with the new words, they're not being confronted. It took us 4 and a bit years to get to the point where last year we started rolling out a program where we had 40 businesses in the district go through, plus all of our schools, including Haast, who came over through a climate action initiative, which was actually a much more concrete way of looking at a footprint, looking at not only what your number is, but also what is your reduction strategy. So then going into that, it can be quite confronting, saying, oh my gosh, this is all that I'm emitting. So the major part of that was also incorporating a wellbeing talk into it, saying, we need to understand that this can be really scary. So it's really important to have that pastoral care. And I think, again, the church, this is one of the major strengths of the church, is providing that support to be able to process things that can be really confronting. And then to come out of that then with a reduction strategy. So once we had that program, but it takes the time to build the soil, to make sure that you're getting everybody on board, that you take the time to talk to everybody. I think that's really key for me, and that you are inspiring them as well along the way. I think it's always key is to providing hope, otherwise we get paralyzed. And there is a lot of hope when we get this right. I think there is a lot of hope. I think what really gives me hope is the number of people who are involved in this. It's actually the people and how that behaviour is shifting. That really give me hope. The kids give me hope too, going and seeing the schools and seeing how this education is actually, this is part of their thinking going forward. So there's a lot of this that will become easier because they will have the right thought processes in place. But again, I don't think we can wait, and we cannot put it on their shoulders to do everything. I think the intergenerational aspect of it, I know within our organisation we have, on our board we've got the youngest is around 25 and the oldest is in his, he would be early 70s, I guess, late 60s, early 70s. So it's that combining together of those generations and coming together on an issue, which gives me hope that we can get through this. And there does seem to be, I've found that since last year, and on the board with us as well is another Carly Green, who she's one of the lead IPCC authors, so one of the ones who is looking into the climate change at that global level, is that there's been a real shift in behaviour despite COVID since, or maybe because of COVID, but since last year. That would be, we can see that, after pushing the ball uphill for a long time, it suddenly seems to be getting easier and almost seeing that peak. And I think once we get to that point at the top of the hill, it will get easier to get action really starting to roll. I think that the biggest thing that I would say to any group is that we just need to be really pragmatic about this. This change is coming. There's no doubt about this. And there is, we can either go two ways. We can either sort of hide away and not do anything. And sometimes we need to do that, and to protect those people that maybe do need to do that. And on the other side, we also need to have those who are just rolling up their sleeves and getting stuck in and doing things. And the one of the individual level, at the individual level, we can make little changes within our own lives and within our community. But I think that there's potential to really move fast when we work together with others. So it's who are we partnering with? What are the key actions? And picking those key actions, almost like, if we look at that Chinese medicine model, is we need to find those little nerve points within this system that we're living in, and have a tiny needle where you don't need to put much pressure, but you put it at the right place, and that will ripple out change everywhere. So where are those points within your community, within your district, within our region, that we can do that? And it may be lobbying to government, it may be going and talking to the council, it may be partnering with other groups, it may be working and partnering with those within the church. It just needs to, I think that each group finding those points and those priorities where there's the least effort for the maximum benefit is what we need to do at the moment.